Some of you need to forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for what you didn't know, for what you didn't know to do. Many of us made the best decision we knew to make at that time. I read to you in the previous episode from my book Necessary, a chapter on head of household, a very, very sensitive chapter. I read a little bit from that. So if you didn't get a chance to listen to that, I encourage you to go back and listen. Now I'm going to read a little bit from chapter 18. I don't even think I've read anything from this chapter, or at least beyond the affirmation, because it's such a sensitive chapter for me. But for whatever reason, God is placing it in my heart. This is going to help give healing to someone. So this is a very sensitive chapter. I just want to let you all know, and I'm just going to read a little bit from it. So chapter 18, this is the affirmation, and it's called Horseback Ride. I forgive myself. I made the best decisions I knew to make with the wisdom, knowledge, and courage I had at that time. But now I am wiser. I am stronger. And what happened in the past shall never happen again. I won't feel guilty for what I didn't know. I won't feel discouraged because I wasn't strong enough. I won't be angry with myself any longer. I've moved on to higher grounds. And what happened in my past shall hinder me no more. I forgive myself. I forgive me. And now I am ready to live. God, give me strength. That is the affirmation for chapter 18. And I'm going to read a little bit. I don't even know how much I'm going to be able to read from this. I want to be sensitive because this walks through a couple situations that happened when I was younger. And if you've been through a situation where in any case you've been abused and you want to skip past and not listen to this, that's totally fine to do. And I'm going to be sensitive with how much I read and what I share, okay? So chapter 18, this is called Horseback Ride. I'm reading from my book Necessary. By the way, my name is Zenja Glass. I only wanted a horseback ride. I never knew it would change my life forever. He was no stranger to the family. He was completely drunk, as was the norm during that time. But I had no reason to turn down a moment of happiness by accepting his horseback ride. It was finally my turn, and I was so excited. So without hesitation, I jumped in his arms and swirled around to his back so that I could ride like all the other kids and enjoy being a cowgirl. He bucked and galloped around the room and trotted like a horse with me on his back, skipping and making funny sounds while I held on tight. It was so much fun. I laughed and laughed as he galloped around the living room, staggering into almost every piece of furniture, but I didn't care. Because I was a cowgirl and it was exciting being lifted high into the air and spinning around the room. Little did I know. My laughter would be short-lived. He galloped me around the room. He put both of his arms behind his back. Now I'm going to skip past the next part of what I'm going to say. All I'll just say is that I was abused. And I'm just going to skip past that. You all can obviously read the book and read more detail, but I always am mindful of what people are going through and being careful with what I put out here on the internet. And I want to make sure I always leave people feeling encouraged and built up. So just stick with me a little bit because this still ends on a good note, depending on what you would call a good note. But I'm going to skip past what happened. All I'll just say is that no child should ever have to go through any type of abuse. So I'm going to skip down. I didn't know what was happening. It was as if the horseback ride came to a slow grinding end. And then I go on to talk about some things that happened that were in which I was abused. So let me just skip down to the next paragraph. For the first time in my life, My eyes were open to a demonic spirit I never knew existed. I didn't realize an adult could do that to a child. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I just kept saying, I want to get down. Put me down. It was the only gentle plea I could muster because I was in a state of pain, shock, confusion, and for some reason, embarrassment as though I did something wrong. And I'm going to skip down a little bit more because I don't want to go into detail about things. I'm gonna jump to the part where I say I quickly ran into my bedroom. I quickly ran into my bedroom and shut the door, never saying a word to anyone. I sat in my room. I have to skip past some of this description. Confused, feeling unprotected, and for some reason ashamed and forever changed. I don't recall eating dinner that night, but I do recall thinking to myself that I didn't want to cause any trouble or ruin the little bit of happiness I saw in my mother's face as she made dinner. I also didn't want him to beat my mother because I knew if I told her what had just happened, she would come to my defense. So I protected her. I said nothing. I kept my mama safe. I kept my siblings safe. Somehow, as young as I was, I reasoned that by keeping silent and pretending nothing happened, I was protecting my family. I don't even know if he remembered what happened the next day. He acted as if all was well, but I was forever changed. I stayed silent. I took the fall for the family. For the sake of one less argument, one less move, one less traumatic event. My mother has now passed away. I never told her what happened that day. I can't count the number of times I stood up to abusers in my mama's life from such a young age. Perhaps that's why they tried to avoid fighting her directly in front of me, because they knew I would grab a mirror or anything my small hands could find or hold and run to her defense. But that time, the abuse was directed at me. It took me by surprise, and the little warrior inside of me was just beginning to rise. My mother was a teenager when she gave birth to me. Unfortunately, her mother passed away as a young woman. And without much guidance from a mother figure in her life, it was no surprise my mother became pregnant at a very young age after only one experience with a man in the military who wanted to meet her in the back of a truck on a warm fall day. In essence, she was a child raising a child. And she did her very best to raise her children with the wisdom and courage she had at that time. And I'm just going to skip down a little bit. Let me just skip down. Despite the fact that she was constantly in and out of abusive relationships in her younger years, she was a very loving mother who always taught her children about God. She had a huge heart and would always find a way to give to others. I would not have traded my mother for anyone in the world. She loved hard, and everyone knew it. Many years later, my mom not only became a licensed social worker, but a licensed minister as well. And then I just go on to talk about, I'm not going to keep reading this through. I go on to talk about my biological father, and many people may not be aware. I never saw his face or even met him a single day in my life from the moment I was conceived until I was in college. And here's the surprise to this. The vast majority of the time when I grew up in Arkansas. My grandfather was on a farm. He helped raise me because my mom was so young when she had me. My father only lived literally, I think, 1, 2, 3 blocks away from us. So I go on to talk about how I remember all the times I would drive down the street just to see my last name on his mailbox. And I go on into detail about that. And then I go on to talk about some other situations, which I'm not going to read right now. Some other situations that happen that are very hard to talk about when someone came to visit our house and I was there by myself. Let me end this on a high because some of you may be able to identify with some things. The next story that I shared a similar situation happen. And I talked about how I didn't speak up and I didn't say anything simply because I knew that my relative would have done some major things to this person, a friend of his, if he would have known what this person had just done. And I go on to talk about I remained silent because I didn't want my words to harm anyone. And so can you imagine for years, now that happened in my younger years, but can you imagine for years thinking back on the past and just wondering, why didn't I say anything? Or why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I know? Why didn't I know to do better? Why was I trying to protect that person instead of exposing what was happening? That's where I'm going with this. I had to learn when I got older, and God really put this in my heart. I'm praying to God, please, God, let this bring healing to someone. You made the best decision you knew to make at that time. You can't keep, whether you were a child or not when it happened, because some of you may be thinking, but see, I was an adult and I still let it happen. You made the best decision you knew to make at that time. I'm so grateful God decided to work through me to write this chapter. This is one of those chapters I was not even going to put in the book. And I thought I was done, and God said, you got to put that in there. I said, God, my family doesn't even know about this. No one even knows the kind of stuff I'm about to write about. And God was placing in my heart, but this is going to bring healing to others. And so I that's what the affirmation comes from, is that I forgive myself. I forgive me. I made the best decisions I knew to make at that time. I'm sure my mama was making the best decisions she knew to make at that time, being a child herself, having children. Some of you are holding on to that pain, holding on to I should have made better choices. You made the best decision you knew to make at that time. And so finally, when I began to get freedom in forgiving myself, this isn't even about forgiving others at this point. It's forgiving myself. I kept holding on to, I should have said something. I should have done something. And even in my adult life, there's things that happen. There's a number of things that happen. Oh my God. If you've read my book, Necessary, you already know, some of the things a lot. And there's so many times I look back and I'm like, gosh, why did I let that happen? Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I say something? Why didn't I take a stand? And so the day that God freed me to realize, baby, you made the best decision you knew to make at that time, with the wisdom, with the knowledge, and get this, with the courage you had at that moment. But I'm not going to be chained to that any longer. Let me see what I wrote in the reflection. I'm not going to read through some of the others because there's some other examples in here, but I'm not going to leave anyone on a low. You guys are going to be left on a high. I'm going to read a little bit of the reflection. These events happened in my life when I was just a little girl, prior to us fleeing up north from an abusive relationship. This is why resting is so important. And I think, by the way, the next chapter, one of the chapters in my book is called Rest, about how it's so important we take time to rest and sit still. Let our minds just catch up with life, right? Just sitting and resting and being still before God. So this is why resting is so important. When I finally began to take the time to rest and sit silently with God, it allowed me the necessary time I needed to remember and to heal. Some of this stuff I just forgot about. I put it so way back in the back of my mind because I didn't see any reason for bringing it up again. It wasn't going to do me no good. And I didn't realize I needed to go back to those moments and seek healing. And let me just be clear on this. I am not trying to show up and pretend as if I am a trained expert to be able to walk you through trauma. I believe seeking professional care, if you feel that's what you need from an expert, please do that, baby, if you feel that that's needed. I'm simply sharing my story to help you on the journey that this is what helped me. When I began to rest, I began to remember, and then I began to go through healing. So let me keep reading. I've gone back to those places with God and received the healing I needed. But I chose to keep this chapter in my book because I know that a large percentage of people can probably identify in some way or another. And in case you're wondering, And I go on to talk about how my relative has passed away. One of my relatives never even knew. None of my relatives knew what happened. The next paragraph says, it is easy to ask someone why they didn't say anything after the abuse has occurred. I am not a professional counselor, and I won't pretend to speak on behalf of others. As for myself, I simply did not know what to do at that time. I did not have the wisdom nor the courage to make a different choice. I forgive myself for what I did not know. And I pray that somehow, by including this chapter in my book, the cycle of remaining silent is prevented and healing is provided for others. If only one person has been helped by my story, it is well worth it. And as with every chapter in my book, I go on to give some recommended reading. In this particular chapter, I didn't give a recommended reading. This is the only chapter in my book where there's not a recommended reading. In this chapter, I ended it by, and I did end it with some assignment questions. The assignment questions is, can you identify with any part of this chapter? If so, how? Question number 2 talks about, have you begun the journey of healing from within? If not, what steps are you willing to take to start taking care of you, baby? Those are some of the assignment questions. But let me read the recommended reading. I wasn't planning on reading this to you, and then I'll close this out. Instead of a recommended reading, I would like to ask you to check on those you love and let them know you are there for them if they ever have anything they want to talk about that might seem uncomfortable. Please also take some time to pray for those who are dealing with abusive situations. Additionally, check on yourself. If you can identify with any area of my story, please know that you're not alone. There are several communities and organizations throughout the world that are willing to help you. I pray if there is anyone who is going through this right now, or who has not come forth to get help, especially a child, a teenager, a young adult, that you would please find someone to speak with. And then I go on to list some of the resources that are listed on my site of, 1-800 numbers and things of that such. So I want to end with this. I know this is a sensitive chapter. I know I jumped around a little bit. Number 1, please forgive yourself for what you didn't know to do at that time. I pray that this is a moment that healing is starting for you. Please, I beg of you, seek the care from a professionally trained expert who can help you with whatever situation you're dealing with. There are many, many, many organizations out there. The only reason I'm not recommending one right now in this live, organizations come and organizations go. So I would just say go do a Google search, and I can almost guarantee you there's going to be 1-800 numbers and services out there to be able to get the help you need. But please begin the process of healing. This kept me low for many years, you guys. I went through a lot, not only as a child, not only, as a teenager, not only as a wife, a mother. There's so many things that I went through in life. And there's so many times I look back and I was like, why didn't I do something different? Or why didn't I say something? Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And I'm so thankful that God finally gave me freedom by helping me to realize, baby, you made the best decision you knew at that time with the wisdom, with the knowledge, and with the courage that you have. I pray that you are encouraged. Do not be discouraged. You should be encouraged. Encouraged because there are people who can identify with what you may be going through or what you've gone through. And encouraged because I pray, God, please let my life be a living example. I pray that you're seeing a living example that, wow, if this person went through just a little bit that I know that there's hope for me as well. Okay? I love you all. I pray that you're encouraged. You're listening to Z with Unlocking Greatness Podcast.